Minecraft Endventures is an ill-conceived YouTube series from the mind of a 14-year-old with a lot of ideas and not a lot of anything else needed to make an animated series. The result is what I can only think to call a compilation of beginner mistakes. Mistake number 1, setting the scope too big. Most people do this at some point, thinking that they are going to single-handedly create the next grand epic despite not having a clue what they are doing. Endventures was a massive idea that was supposed to feature elaborate, expertly animated fight scenes with dozens of on-screen characters at once, professional voice acting and gripping drama, and well, it wasn't exactly that. Mistake number 2. Instead of starting smaller upon realizing just how out of reach this idea was and leave it for when it's within your ability, shrinking down the scope until it no longer resembled itself. Mistake number 3. Immediately publishing your work instead of spending some time practicing, watching tutorials, and silently improving the background. The first thing you ever do when learning a new skill is probably not going to be worth showing, at least not with the expectation that it will see any manner of success. And it goes on from there, to such a degree that over the course of only 12 episodes, there is a radical shift in quality and direction multiple times and frequent retconning as the kid changes his mind and scrambles to figure out what he's even doing. Throughout its entire lifespan, the series was atrociously managed with dubious results at best. In fact, I rewatched it in preparation for this video, and it's somehow worse than I remember, in some regards, especially the pacing. Everything is so quick. In the episodes where there's only text and no spoken dialogue, it's so hard to keep up. Because everything just happens so fast, and the same goes for everything else, and I know why I did that. It's because I subscribe to this mindset that if I animated something quickly, you wouldn't be able to tell that it wasn't actually looking good. So I would frequently take shortcuts in order to compensate for the fact that I wasn't very good at animating, and evidently I wasn't willing to learn because, well, I didn't. As I said in the past, I don't actually enjoy animating. It took me years to realize that, but I only ever wanted the result, so the fact that Endventures got as far as it did was purely due to me taking these shortcuts to lighten the load on myself and my desire to see the result. And the audio balancing, poof. Some people are screaming your ears out and some people are barely audible at the same time, and the sound effects is the exact same thing. It's really clear that this is a teenager who has only recently started using editing software and hasn't yet understood the value of keeping everything at more or less the same volume. Some episodes I consider nearly unwatchable because they require frequent input from the viewer in order to make the experience as intended. You need to adjust the volume yourself over the course of the episode and need to pause it in order to read it or just play it slowly in order to see what's even happening. And again, that's to say nothing of all the stuff that's going on in the story. And yet, for some reason, in spite of all that I just said, some people liked it. A significant amount of people, really. So much so that even though the series came to an indefinite halt way back in 2015, over half a decade ago, there are still some who are desperate to know where it was going. And this video is for those people. While I don't have the desire or arguably even the ability to finish the series, I can at the very least tell you what would have happened. I still have the entire story in my head, and I'm going to try to present it as accurately to what I would have done at the time as possible. I won't be able to do this flawlessly because I have forgotten some parts over the years, and I've also done so many mental rewrites that it's hard to keep track of what iteration I would have gone for if I had finished the series. But hopefully this will be sufficient as a conclusion. So, let's get into it. This is how Endventures would have ended, had it not ended prematurely. Most of this video is just going to have some still images or whatever else I can think of as visual accompaniment, but for starters I actually have animated footage. I was already halfway through episode 13 by the time I had my initial breakdown, so I'm just going to let the footage play uninterrupted while I talk. That way I get something out of it at long last. I also still have the script, so I will be adding subtitles as well. It might be hard to divide your attention between the dialogue and me, but I don't want this video to get super long, so I'm putting them on top of each other to save time. So just focus on one at a time and then rewind if necessary. Anyway, to give you some behind the scenes info before we start, this was actually the first episode where I wrote the script before finishing the animation. Previously I would always do it afterwards, just in case I changed my mind while animating. The obvious drawback of doing it this way is that I would sometimes forget what I meant for a character to say at any given point, so there are times in the series where people say something they weren't originally supposed to say because I just straight up forgot their line. Another reason I did it this way was that I didn't want to inconvenience my voice actors by forcing them to redo some of their lines in case I made changes, not realizing that this is a completely acceptable thing to do. So instead, I inconvenienced absolutely everyone else, both my audience and myself, since my voice actors would only be able to start recording their lines after the animation was already finished, leading to an extended period where I was just sitting around waiting, which in turn caused completely unnecessary delays. Stuff like this really demonstrates that I did not possess the social competence to manage a project like this. I'm pretty sure there were even instances of me complaining about my voice actors causing delays, so if I ever did do that, let it be known that it was entirely my fault and I was being an idiot. Sure, there were times when a voice actor would just straight up vanish and never contact me again, but that's still on me for pulling randos out of my audience instead of looking for at least semi-professional voice actors. As for the script, I was tempted to revise it a bit because, well, it's over a decade old and I've learned a lot about writing since then. But since I'm trying to present this as true to what it would have been as possible, I've chosen to leave in all the flaws. But I am going to list some of the revisions I would have wanted to do on screen now, just for my own sake. You may also notice that Colin's skin looks different here. That's because my friend Luna updated it for me, being a way better artist than me. She was going to do the same for Shadow since his skin is also awful, and I considered adding a scene where he kills a cow and a squid or something to make new clothes. But things never got that far, so he's still wrapped up in black toilet paper. But now let's talk about the actual story. In hindsight, I wanted more scenes where the group talks about the situation and what to do next, mostly so Katie could establish herself more, being the most recent addition to the cast, and me wanting to properly express that she's really worried about their chances and doubting that they can win. This was going to be important later, so if I actually finished the episode, I would probably have added a scene or two like this at some point during the animation process. As is, we get right into things. As seen in the end of the previous episode, the triplets have found a group and are following them. However, they don't actually have hostile intentions. It's revealed that they aren't too happy with the Endmaster either, and they're trying to figure out a way to tell the group that they want to help without being attacked. In hindsight, this does kind of come out of left field, like they've been really helpful to the Endmaster's cause up until this point, so it doesn't really seem like they have any motivation to do this, but just wanted to have some good Endermen at some point, I guess, and that these were among the few that had any role in the story so far. Anyway, while they're discussing this, Wrecker catches them, and he's totally fine with the Endermaster, so once he figures out that the triplets have sympathies for the enemy, he lets them off with a stern warning. He then gets some Endermen together and goes after the group, following them underground into an abandoned mine. This leads to a fight scene where everyone is in a minecart, something I have been looking forward to animating for a long time. Now, sadly, the animation stops right before this starts, but knowing my animation skills, that's probably for the best. Just imagine that it's really impressive and I truly outdid myself. Hello, this is Future Will here, editing the video, and noticing that there is 6 minutes left of the footage. And I don't want to get too far ahead, so I'm just gonna fill a few minutes talking about anything I didn't have time to talk about in the rest of the video. And I'm gonna devote it to Click Clack and No Brains, because these are two characters that really fell below my expectations even at the time. Starting with Click Clack, I imagined him to be this wisecracking laid-back skeleton with a country accent, but he didn't really turn out to be that, largely because of his voice. Like, it's very, very clearly a kid trying and failing to deliver a performance that's out of his ability, which, as I've said before, is 100% my fault because I chose the voice actor. Even at the time I knew it wasn't a good choice, but I didn't really have anyone else who was doing any better, and I was too dumb to think that maybe I should go and look for a professional one instead of just waiting for one in my audience to magically work out. Like, again, the fact that I had such good luck with a few of them, the fact that the Endermaster and Colin and a few others like fit their characters so well and is like downright professional in how good they are at like getting their performance across is pretty amazing. But yeah, then there were ones with like Click Clack where you get what you would have expected instead. And also his jokes just aren't really that funny. I noticed that when rereading the script for episode 13 that the comedy with them was getting better. Like, also watching the animation, the visual comedy between both of them is better. So I was clearly figuring out how to do these characters the way I was hoping, but that still means that for most of the series, and well, up until this point at all, since you hadn't even seen this previously unreleased half-finished episode, they weren't even up to that standard, and they still weren't really what I wanted them to be. Very few things in the show got to the level that I was aspiring towards, but Click Clack in particular was one that there was a huge disparity between what I wanted and what I got. No Brains I didn't really have as high expectations for, but I still feel like he's kind of a dud as a character. Like, most of his jokes just kind of come down to him doing or saying something silly. He's actually kind of a monster school character that just happened to wander on set of an Endventures episode. And looking at it now that I have a lot more experience, and again looking back at the footage I got and the script I got, I think I could have done the character way better. Even though the both of them are just comic relief characters, there was potential to have them be more than that, or at the very least be better comic relief. And one thing that you see glimpses of in this episode, and possibly previous ones as well, is him succeeding when he shouldn't, and I think that could have been a funny theme for a character, like someone who keeps falling upwards, so to say. Like, he's a total idiot, but he just somehow always gets out on top, at least when it matters. Kind of like an RPG character with terrible stats who keeps rolling really high. Like stuff like him reaching a button he shouldn't physically be able to reach, that's kind of funny. And hell, the joke about him having such a slow reaction time that it takes him a good 10 seconds to figure out that Click-Clack is no longer playing patty cake with him, that's also kind of funny. Like, that's the kind of comedy I think works for this sort of character. Again, there was also the issue of the voice. Like, listening back to it, the voice is really no good for this character. It's really annoying and not in a funny way, and half the time it's not even intelligible, and that's not a good thing. I even said at the time that I wanted sort of a voice that like sounds like the act of speaking takes a heavy toll on him, like every word is kind of forced out, like it's a huge mental task for him just to communicate. But I didn't get that, and again I didn't really bother searching for it. So again, I have to reiterate, everything I'm complaining about when talking about the voice actors is my fault. But yeah, it's a character that I think I could have done way better. Like, obviously I could have done anything way better, and at this point you would hope so, given how much time has passed and how much I've been practicing this sort of thing. But I really think that there is untapped potential here that, in retrospect, I'm kind of sad that I didn't, well, tap. And speaking of which, I even thought about how Boom could have had more of an impact. Like, he's only in the series for one episode, and even then he doesn't do much more than dying. But he could have still had a lingering effect on the series, even if I didn't keep him alive. One thing I noticed glimpses of rewatching this is an element that I think I could have highlighted a lot more, and it would have made the characters a lot more interesting, which is to really bring attention to the fact that they are 2/3 of a trio. Like, there's one crucial portion of their gang missing. It doesn't come across very well, but I was kind of setting up Boom as the caretaker for No Brains, like the only one who understands him and has the patience to deal with him, whereas Click-Clack is more the protector. He doesn't have that same patience for No Brains' shenanigans, and he isn't as good at empathizing with him. And I think that would be a really interesting dynamic to explore. Like, showing the toll it takes on Click-Clack to now have to be the protector and the caretaker, a role that he is not used to and not good at, and the impact it has on No Brains that he has lost his caretaker. So he now doesn't have that support that he needs. Kind of like when you have a family and one of the parents die, and now the remaining parent is stuck with all the responsibility, including the portions of it that they have no experience with. Another thing I would want to change is Boom's actual death scene. I think it would have been way better to have it happen on screen. At the time I thought it would be more dramatic to have it happen off screen so you don't even get to see it, he's just gone. But in hindsight, since you have seen so little of this character, it doesn't really do that. It would have more of an impact if you actually saw the interaction, if you saw him trying to protect No Brains from the Endermen, and him being driven to this point of exploding. And then you could, again, afterwards build on the emotional impact of that by showing what happens when he's gone. Retroactively make you feel bad for a character who wasn't in the show for very long, just by reminding you of his absence and showing what that entails. Anyway, I believe we are about caught up now. I could really do this for all the characters and really all things in this series, but at least I got one of the bigger things off my mind there. Anyway, the fight abruptly ends as they run out of tracks, and the group ends up on a stone pillar while Wrecker teleports to higher ground and starts throwing TNT at them. A Mines of Moria sequence ensues, and the only one to make it to safety is Katie. Then, rather than helping her comrades, she gets spooked and runs off, abandoning them. Click-Clack gets the right idea to shoot an arrow through a lava column, setting it on fire and igniting all the TNT Wrecker is chucking at them. This blows everything up and seemingly kills him, but it's too late for the group and the pillar topples over, sending them all falling into the lava. And then they all die. Katie is the new main character now. Okay, so that's not true, but it would have been a funny twist. But no, nobody dies, not even Wrecker. He just teleported to safety again. He ascertains that the group is dead and then goes after Katie. Meanwhile, it's revealed that the group, of course, didn't die either. As you may or may not recall, No Brains has a stash of fire resistance potions that he uses as sunscreen, so everyone just chugged a bottle each before the fall. A bit of a cop-out, but oh well. So they make their way to safety and explore the abandoned mine, which turns out to be the same mine as the one from the Miner's Bane. This tie-in wasn't originally planned, but by the time I was animating the episode I had determined that it worked out pretty well. It made the mine a bit more interesting than just another generic abandoned mine, and it established that the events of the Miner's Bane took place in the Endventures universe, because that was originally planned. The creatures that appear in that video are one of the many ideas I had saved for a sequel series to Endventures. I won't elaborate much on that here since it's not relevant to the series, but I'll throw up an info dump for anyone who's curious about what exactly they were supposed to be. I don't remember much of what happens in the mine, but I do remember having a joke about Click-Clack identifying a skeleton they come across as a girl, and when others ask how he knows, he points to things that are obvious to him but no one else can discern. The joke, of course, is that he's a skeleton. Gold tier comedy. Eventually they find a deactivated nether portal from the end of the Miner's Bane, and they decide to reactivate it and go through because they'll need blaze powder to get to the end, and they should be safe from the Endermen there. Now, from this point forward, I'm somewhat unsure about the order of events. There's a lot more perspective changes and I don't quite recall what happens when. This goes on until the group returns from the Nether. I've tried to map it out in a way that makes sense, so hopefully it does. So meanwhile, Katie is caught by Wrecker and begs for mercy, offering to join the Endermen if they'll spare her. As you may recall, at the end of episode 12, this was something I was trying to set up, and like I mentioned, I wanted to establish it a little more, but yeah, she ends up betraying everyone. Amused by the prospect, Wrecker agrees to it just to see how the Endermaster handles it. But to his surprise and dismay, he accepts her. He wants to encourage humans submitting to him, so as a sign of generosity, he even grants Katie magical powers, turning her into a half-Enderman magical girl. This was the plan for Katie all along, and the entire reason her character was introduced. I'm pretty sure I even spoiled this by asking for a voice actor for an Ender Mage in my video requesting voice actors, but that one seems to have been removed, so I can't confirm that. A problem you will see later though is that besides this, I didn't have much of a plan for her. Like a lot of things in Endventures, I just did it because I thought it was a neat idea and I didn't consider if it would actually add anything to the story. We also get some insight into why the Endermaster hates humans so much. This is another instance of retconning, since initially he just did it because of some flimsy, poorly explained, "oh, the crystal made him crazy" plot device, but in hindsight I decided to give him a more credible motivation. So in an attempt to do that, we get a flashback from his childhood. First, some backstory. In this world, all griefers were imprisoned behind a massive wall, with command blocks preventing anyone from destroying or building near it to ensure that there's no way in or out. This was yet another idea I thought of way in advance that I wanted to put in a sequel series, but like the Miner's Bane, I came up with a means of tying it into Endventures. Namely, the Endermaster is actually from there, but he's not a griefer. Rather, the griefers would occasionally have children just so they would have more people to mess with. He was one of them. Funny enough, I have animation for this too. This was a good while after my depression became a serious problem and served as my attempt to get back into animating. Not only that, but at this point I had decided that I was unhappy with the low quality of my animations and I tried to put a genuine effort into it. Obviously it never amounted to much, but nevertheless, here it is. This is the last thing I ever did in Minimator. As you can see, I only got a few seconds in and I didn't even animate every character in the scene, but I think you can still tell that I'm finally trying my best. Still not great, because trying your best is not the same as being good, but still. The griefers are obviously heavily stylized because it's a flashback showing them for what the Endermaster saw them as. I also wanted them to have light sources coming out of their faces to make it look like searchlights as they hunted him. Anyway, the Endermaster tries to get away from his tormentors and reaches the Great Wall. There he finds an Enderman standing around and he tries to give his pet chicken to it, begging it to teleport to safety. The Enderman is moved by his selflessness and realizes that he's not a griefer and thus shouldn't be here. So he teleports both the chicken and the Endermaster to the other side of the wall, freeing him. The two become friends, and the Enderman is of course Endre. Or Endry, I never did establish how his name is pronounced. The way I initially imagined it in my head was Endry, but I'm not sure if that's the proper spelling to pronunciation. But yeah, this is why the Endermaster wants to purge humanity. He has only ever known griefers, so he is under the impression that all humans are like that. There's probably some clever commentary in there about prejudice or how a bad crowd can ruin good people, but we don't have time for that. Then we see the witches that were hypnotized into making potions for the Enderman. You'll be forgiven if you forgot about the side plot, because I'm pretty sure there's like 1 or 2 scenes of the Endermen actually using their potion sweatshop. Anyway, some Endermen are standing around getting drunk, and one of them gives a witch a strong pat on the back. The others warn him that the hypnosis isn't very strong and getting hurt might snap them out of it. But he keeps working mindlessly, so they assume everything is fine. However, a dramatic zoom-in reveals that the witch in question is no longer hypnotized, but faking it to bide her time. It's also the Mad Witch from before, which I'm not sure how I was going to establish since they all look identical. Now, I know for a fact that the next scene is not supposed to happen right after the previous one, but since I don't remember the actual order, this is the best I can do. So we immediately get another scene with the Mad Witch, where she has managed to sneak off to talk to Enderia, who is still torn up about failing her daddy. She tells her about something terrible in the Nether, something that could pose a major threat to the Endermaster and his plan. If she were to destroy it, he would definitely be proud of her again. Being the naive and emotionally compromised girl that she is, Endeavour decides to pursue this threat and leave through the end portal when she thinks nobody sees her. However, Katie does and asks her what she's doing. Endeavour explains and manages to get her to promise not to tell anybody, but unfortunately Wrecker has seen the whole thing. We then shift back to the group as they explore the Nether, having found another fortress that doesn't look like a normal one. I actually did build it, but the save has long since been lost. Probably for the best since I'm not a great builder anyway, but just so you have a visual, here's something someone else made. Let's just pretend I did that. They go inside and meet the Wither King. Yeah, he was supposed to be in this all along. Or well, not all along, Endventures has gone through more rewrites than I can count, but he's been planned to be it since almost the beginning. I don't remember this part too well, but they managed to convince him to join them in the fight against their common enemy, the Endermaster. The fact that the Wither King also wants to take over the world is a bit of an issue, but they hope that the two will kind of take each other out. And if you're wondering why the Wither King hasn't done anything until now, I think it may have been something as stupid as him not knowing that there's a portal back, which he would, because he came through one, but let's not think too much about that. On the way back to the portal, they learn that the Wither King used to be a mortal man, and he is revealed to be the sole survivor from the Miner's Bane. This is another later addition. Originally I hadn't really considered at all who he was when he was human, but I thought it was a cute tie-in. Anyway, while looking for a way to reactivate the portal, he encountered a tunnel lit with redstone torches. Here he found a magical scythe, which turned him into the Wither King. From the redstone torch tunnel, it's probably obvious that Herobrine had a hand in the creation of him, just like he created the Endermaster. Don't worry, there is a payoff, and don't worry, it's super lame. On the way back to the portal, they encounter Enderia, and she and the Wither King fight. And of course, since Enderia can't assume her dragon form outside the end unless she's really strong through some means that is never properly explained, she loses. The Wither King defeats her and kills her. And through the loosely established telepathic link she has with the Endermaster, he feels her death and becomes utterly furious. He summons Wrecker and asks him if he knows anything about it. And Wrecker, who has been holding onto some valuable info waiting for the moment to weaponize it, feigns ignorance and says that last he saw Enderia, she was speaking to Katie. Omitting the part where he clearly saw her leave, because he's still really salty that Katie was rewarded for weakness and cowardice and has been aching for an opportunity to get her into trouble. Katie is of course forced to tell the Endermaster what happened and takes the blame for it. And the Endermaster tells her that she can avoid punishment if she brings him Enderia's dragon egg and kills whoever killed her. If she fails, she will regret ever being born. Though for reasons I cannot remember, Wrecker and the other Endermen are not sent on the same mission. Instead, the Endermaster explains to Wrecker that the experience orbs creatures drop when they die are fragments of the soul. So if he had all of Enderia's XP, he would be able to reincarnate her into her own dragon egg. Wrecker is pleased to learn that his worldview is being validated, because apparently killing someone does give you their power, in a way. Katie does manage to find a dragon egg and teleport it to the end, and the Endermaster sets up a hatching ritual of sorts that is set to only complete if Enderia's soul is offered to the egg. She then encounters the group, which has become separated from the Wither King for reasons I also can't remember. They fight and Katie loses. Shadow is the one to finish her off, breaking his rule against killing humans. He gives the justification that she is quote-unquote not human anymore. I actually had a number of deaths in mind for Katie, ranging from Red pushing her onto a bed and blowing her up, to being caught standing on gravel when gravity took hold, sending her falling into lava, to getting mauled by pigmen after accidentally provoking them. I'm pretty sure I even discussed this with her voice actor. I had a weird fixation with this character's death. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of Katie's arc. You can tell it was just some cool idea I thought of later on and didn't quite know how to work in, because it ends up being pretty one-note and anticlimactic. If I were to rewrite the series, one of many changes would be having her stay with the group longer and stay with the bad guys longer. Maybe even have a redemption arc or otherwise offer a stronger contribution to the story. Anyway, the group return to the overworld and encounter the triplets, who finally explain that they want to help and give them blocks of packed ice. They reveal that the Endermaster's only weakness is water. If I remember correctly, they discovered this when witnessing an Enderman accidentally splashing a few droplets of potion on him. Which I never mentioned because I actually forgot that was a scene. As such, the best weapon to use against him is one made of ice. Packed ice so it lasts more than one hit. This is why the Mad Witch enchanted Colin's pickaxe with Silk Touch way back in episode 7, so they would be able to collect the ice. Because that should be obvious by now, she can tell the future somehow. I wasn't great at utilizing this plot element, so I think it's telling when I say that this weak payoff is probably my best example of it. So Red crafts some ice swords for everyone, they rejoin with the Wither King and his army of nether mobs at some point, and find an end portal. Then it's time for the final battle. As they arrive, the Endermaster senses that the Wither King is the one who killed Enderia, and the two of them fight. The Wither King goes into his giant three-headed form, and the Endermaster raises an obsidian pillar underneath him to keep up with his height. On the ground, the Endermen and Nether mobs start fighting, and the Mad Witch starts to smack some sense into the other witches, and they join the fight too. Red does something. I'm starting to realize that despite being one of the main characters, he really is useless. His gimmick is that he can craft things others can't, which I think comes into play twice? It's not a bad concept for a character, but I ended up severely underutilizing it. Like, he built some sort of electric sword in one episode and then used it once. And in the thumbnails of the early episodes, he's holding some sort of gun that never appears in the series. In every fight scene he's in, he should have been using some wacky invention, but instead he spends most of them doing nothing. And even out of combat, he, again, does something useful maybe 2 or 3 times. Such a waste of a character. Meanwhile, Shadow fights Wrecker in the Endmaster's castle. Wrecker is about to win, having gotten better now that he's been trained by the Endmaster, which I mentioned at the end of episode 12, but I'm not sure where it was going to come into play later on, but yeah, he's better now, and he's about to kill Shadow, but the triplets start throwing stuff at him to help out. One particularly well-aimed block smacks him in the head and he falls down a tower. He survives the landing, but his own sword falls down and impales him through his only remaining eye, finishing him off. If I recall correctly, his last words will be the only F-bomb in the entire series as he realizes he's done for. And with that, Wrecker is finally dead. He's actually one of the characters that even today I think I was doing a sorta good job with. Like, he started out just kind of being there because I realized that Endre wasn't intimidating, and I still did quite a few rewrites for him, but I did it in such a way that it more seemed like you were learning more about the character rather than the character was changing, because, I didn't really reveal that much initially. It was purely an accident, but it works in the end. So when he does get character development, it's at the point where I've gotten better at writing. Still not great, but better than other characters at least, and it seems people agree with me, because it seems like people liked him as well, so, that's nice to see. I think I was finally starting to get the hang of writing insane characters at this point, because you may have noticed that I kinda like doing that, but with previous instances like the Mad Witch and the Medusa Bell, I kinda thought that all you really needed to do was just have them be a little random, which is not good enough. Like, even if you want a random character, there is some finesse to the randomness. You can't just take complete non sequiturs and think it's going to be funny. So here I was starting to think that there needs to be some internal logic to what they're doing, and I was doing that for Wrecker, so I think he comes across a lot better than any of those characters. It's another thing I, again, would like to go back and change, just take both the Mad Witch and probably also No Brains, who is also just kind of a wild card with no real direction, and add some sort of logic to them, but, obviously a separate kind of logic, just so that what they do seems like something that they would do, rather than just something I came up with on the spot. But anyway, back to the climax. As for Colin, he's still furious about the Endermaster killing Porky, and starts climbing the obsidian pillar. But first, the Mad Witch stops him and hands him a special potion that should make him resistant to the Endermaster's magic. How she knows how to make this potion, or got the ingredients for it, I don't know. I just know that if I didn't have some convenient excuse for why the Endermaster doesn't just telekinetically shake him off the pillar or something, it would be a short fight. Probably one of the weakest instances of plot convenience in the series. Like, this is something that you should dedicate an entire episode or several to. Like, oh, we gotta find a way to resist his magic. Oh, there's this special material or this special thing that we can get. But instead the witch just kind of comes up to him and say, hey, I made this off screen. It's really cheap, I know. Anyway, the Endermaster, badly wounded, finally defeats the Wither King by impaling him with another obsidian pillar and absorbs his XP, and with it, Endaria's soul. As he does, Colin manages to reach the top of the pillar and confronts him. There is of course another fight scene that definitely looked way cooler in my head than I would have done if I actually made it. I wish I had some descriptions for this, since it is the final fight, but I kind of forgot all the details, except that Colin was supposed to have 2 ice swords, and one of them the Endermaster just cuts through at one point. Oh right, also Colin breaks through his chest plate with his pickaxe at one point, I think. But besides that, you just had to use your imagination. I mean, you're gonna have to do it anyway. If verbal descriptions were good enough to just replace animation, I would never have started doing that to begin with. And then the Endermaster is defeated. Like an ender dragon, he floats up into the sky, beams of light bursting through him, and in his dying breath, he cries out for Enderia. The Endermen and Nether mobs now realize that neither of them have a leader anymore, and thus no reason to fight. Things awkwardly go back to normal as the Nether mobs leave, making their way back to the Nether. The groups talk to the witch and the triplets, but I don't remember about what. Then, the group returns to the overworld. Their mission is complete, the big bad has been vanquished, and the war against the Endermen is over. Now all that remains is getting humanity back together and rebuilding civilization. Epilogue! The surviving humans build a new main city where the group is hailed as heroes. Colin is offered to become the new leader, but he settles for something lesser. Exactly what I've forgotten, but I think it was either a soldier of some sort, or he just went back to being a miner. Red opens up a workshop, going back to being a professional inventor. Shadow, being the edgy boy that he is, decides that his half-Enderman self does not belong among humans or monsters, and he goes out into the wilds, his fate ambiguous. I don't quite remember what happens to Click-Clack and No Brains. They either reluctantly decide to go back to being hostile mobs, or stick around in the city as sanctioned monsters, becoming diplomats of sorts. I believe the Mad Witch also moves into the city as a potion seller. But that's not where it ends, because Colin didn't stay on the pillar long enough to absorb the Endermaster's XP, so it's still lying around on top of it. The triplets teleport onto it, collect the XP, and go into the ritual chamber, where the dragon egg is still waiting for Endaria's soul, which they offer to it. Endaria hatches from the egg, fully grown and still in her half-dragon form, since the Undermaster somehow set up all of that already, and she asks where her daddy is. They tell her the bad news, and she doesn't take it too well. She resumes the Ender Dragon's role as the rightful ruler of the End, but she is now determined to return the favor and resurrect the Endermaster just like he did her, an ominous sign of things to come. Meanwhile, we see the Endermaster in the afterlife, which in this universe is portrayed as the place where everything goes when it's no longer in the game. This is not only where dead people go, but also removed features, including, of course, the most removed feature of all. Here I had half a mind to have him wake up on a bus with the Monster School bus driver taking him to his destination as a Charon-like figure. This would have been the only time a Monster School character actually speaks, as the two would have a conversation about what's happening. I ultimately would have likely decided against this though, since Monster School is supposed to be a separate universe from Endventures. The idea of the bus driver being an interdimensional being is kinda funny, but it would have mostly made things confusing. However, the environment that the bus drives through when teleporting is actually supposed to be this same afterlife, so apparently past Will had a really hard time making up his mind as to whether or not he wanted a crossover. Anyway, however it happens, the Endermaster meets Herobrine. One of Herobrine's minions, speaking on his mute behalf, reveals to the Endermaster that he created both him and the Wither King, and whoever defeated the other would become his champion. The role of this champion being to free him from the control of Lord Leskig. Again, you would be forgiven if you forgot that was even a thing. It really is a dumb name, by the way. Like, at the time I was under the impression that if you took something in a different language, it would sound cool in English, but like, it's not always true. There is an art to it. Not all words are going to work out, especially not if people can't even pronounce it. So yeah, one of the many things I didn't handle all too well. Anyway, this would be a segue into the next series I wanted to make, featuring all the characters I made battle animations about and more. Because back then I planned way too far ahead. I should have focused on telling a self-contained story before trying to create an extended universe, but that's not what I did, so unfortunately Endventures still ends on sort of a cliffhanger. But I'm not telling you the entire plot of the sequel series as well. I only remember fragments of it anyway, and I'm pretty sure I never did work it out. I just thought of cool scenes I wanted to do, which really summarizes the entire thought process behind Endventures as well. And that's it. That's how Endventures would have ended. And while I've moved on from it since years back, for all its faults, it still has a special place in my heart. It may have been a long string of dumb mistakes, but they're mistakes I'm glad I made and I had fun making them. In a way, revisiting it like this made me want to start over from the beginning and try to do it right this time, but I can't do that and I shouldn't. I should move on from this, but a problem I have is that I'm never really done with something. There is no story I've ever tried to tell that I've ever been finished telling. I always find ways of continuing. Like, even like this, I had an idea for a video where I'm just talking about alternative ideas that could have made their way into Endventures, or where I talk about behind the scenes stuff, or whatever. I could make an entire series about this series. But again, I shouldn't. I should at some point force myself to stop, because otherwise I'm never gonna stop. And well, I think this is a pretty good place to stop. That's why I bothered making this video. The series ended up playing a pretty significant role in my life, for better and for worse, and it felt wrong to not give it some manner of closure after all of that. And now that I've done that, there's really nothing left for me on this channel. Nothing I want or should engage with, at least. I still have a lot of stories I want to tell and a lot of projects I want to work on, but this is no longer the place for it. So I will be moving on to pursue new ideas elsewhere. Thank you for watching and for contributing to my teenage self's silly passion project going as far as it did. Goodbye.